All righty. Hello there, good people. Hi, it's Jason with Green Country Agroforestry here. I hope I'm coming through okay. I'm seeing a notification from StreamYard that I'm experiencing some ping or some lag here. So if it's coming through okay, let me know. I may have to go back and forth to our live chat in YouTube to be able to keep up the chat. Otherwise, let me see here. I might be able to do something. Try to zoom it out. There we go. Let's go back to comments. All right, let me check to see if this is working here. Okay, good. All right. I have chat back. All right, guys. Sorry about the delay there. Minor technical difficulties. Reading up on what's going on. Sasspress telling us about getting some much needed rain up in Illinois. And I know a lot of people up there have been badly needing some. We got a little bit here last night as well. Okay, so the thumbnail picture might look a little misleading. It's burned out house, which might be the result of things going horribly wrong on the 4th of July celebration. Hopefully that didn't happen to anybody's house that you know or that I know. If it did, they haven't told me yet. But of course, those are consequences, and of course, actions have consequences. One of the consequences of the action of declaring independence is coming up with the necessity of figuring out how we're going to go about exercising our independence. And kind of want to pick up here on July 5th as okay, so we've declared independence. Now what? Of course, we need to understand what we're declaring independence from, too, I suppose. It wasn't just England, and it wasn't just the king. It was also the entire system of governance, a bureaucratic system that came about from a centralized authority in the form that it took. Bicameral legislature, titular head of government, appoints the judiciary, chief executive of the armed forces, that sort of thing. That was England under King George. That was what we had a Revolutionary War to get rid of. And who knows, we may be on the verge of getting ready to do something crazy here in the near future. I have no idea what it's going to be. Possibly Article 5 conventions of the states or something more extreme. Who knows? Crazy times we live in. So it might behoove us, before we get into crazy times, to get to an understanding of what in the world they were trying to accomplish whenever they were writing the Declaration of Independence, what they were trying to build, and maybe that understanding, fly landed in my coffee cup, maybe that understanding may help us prevent some of the worst side effects of what's coming. Carolyn's saying we need to break away from the cities. From the current government and have another revolution. Well, before we get to that point, we need to have another enlightenment. Otherwise, we run the risk of having a French-style revolution, and that can turn out very badly. All right. So I did not bring a whole bunch of materials to throw up on the screen for you because Mary is driving and she wanted to be able to just listen today instead of watching a bunch of stuff. So I wanted to start out by showing you guys the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, because we're going to be talking about those principles for a little bit. And the rest of it, we're just going to get into talking. Pardon me a moment while I bring up some of my notes here. I was writing a paper on natural law and natural rights, and I started it out by addressing whoever is going to be reading this in the future, assuming somebody finds my papers or my correspondence at some point in the future and starts reading it. It's to that person that I'm addressing it, and I have no idea at what point in the future that it is going to be read. So I said, "Dear reader, I don't know how it is in your day, but in mine there are marches, demonstrations, protests, and riots in the streets as one group or another feels the need to assert their rights. Although there seems to be a lot of confusion abroad as to what is or is not a human right. There's also a tendency in my day for the average person to possess a very limited span of attention. So I can't talk. I should be brief. In order to define natural rights, we first have to have a comprehension of natural law. And as I was just mentioning, people's attention span is very, very brief. And if I start talking about natural law, a lot of people are going to be sitting here going, oh no, it's going to be a 4-hour long lecture. And he's going to pull out the Bible and he's going to be looking at things in here and saying, this is how God ordained it. And I'm not interested in hearing that. Don't worry, we're not going to do that. Because I have exactly people like that in mind for this conversation. For the purpose of developing and maintaining human civilization, natural law is the body of rules that, in principle, human beings must observe in order to function as a society. So without spending reams of paper on exploring the philosophical underpinnings, the natural law for human civilization amounts to just three very, very simple restrictions. I can explain each one in turn. The first restriction, wait a minute, before I get into that, do you guys want a little what do they call it? A teaser? Something to pique the interest, maybe keep you hanging around for a little bit longer. I'll throw one of those out. Before I'm done here, I will make a case for why trial by jury and voting are not natural rights. Are you interested in hearing that argument? Okay, so let's get to natural law. The three things that people that are going to exist together in a society, a functioning society, for the most part, are going to need to adhere to. Number one, as no human being wishes to be the victim of assault, the civil person will refrain from committing assault. Now, there's all different kinds of behavior that can be considered an assault, and the nature and intensity of an assault can temper one's expectations of justice. I may have mentioned this before, but there are a lot of people out there that would consider an insult against your mother or against your family or against maybe yourself to be justification for a slap or a punch. Although most people would accept that a slap or a punch is a greater offense than a cruel word. That's the first one. Nobody wants to be assaulted. And since nobody wants to be assaulted, and this is a common desire amongst all human beings, it is easy to see that that is a natural law. I don't want to be assaulted. I don't assault people. They don't assault me. This is natural law. Number two, as no human being desires to be the victim of theft. And there are, once again, many different types of theft, ways theft can take place. You could have burglary, pickpocketing, shoplifting, armed robbery or mugging. We could have theft of value in the form of vandalism as well. There are different ways that people can be robbed or have their property reduced in value by the actions of others. Nobody wants to be the victim of these sorts of crimes. Universally, no one, even thieves, as it turns out, do not want to be stolen from. So the civil person will refrain from committing acts of theft. You could even say that more complicated rackets, like compelling a victim to accept worthless items and barter under the threat of some sort of mayhem being committed against them, might be a form of theft. Number three, no human being consents to their own murder. And I know somebody might say, but what about assisted suicide, euthanasia or assisted suicide? Well, if you were trying to commit suicide, you would be consenting. The consent is kind of important. But no being consents to their own murder. The murder is the taking of the life without the consent and without just cause. The civil person will refrain from committing murder. Murder and killing are obviously not the same thing, because it may be necessary for a person to defend themselves or others from the violations of natural law. And the offender, having forfeited their mutually assured protection under natural law, may suffer loss of life or grievous injury as a consequence of having strayed away from natural law. So that is it. That is natural law in a nutshell. Pretty simple, easy to comprehend. It doesn't require reams and reams of paper or mountains of evidence. All you have to do is examine yourself. What are my thoughts and feelings on the matter? Do I want to be assaulted? No. I want to be robbed. No. Do I want to be murdered? No. Is there anything else that people could do out there aside from those things that I would really ultimately find objectionable? And of course, if you do have an objection, we might examine the reason for that objection and see if it does not, in fact, fit one of those three criteria of either an assault or a theft or something of that nature. Because, yes, okay, John is saying theft by inflation. Exactly. This is the example. We have these things, right? These things. Ooh, I have one. We have these things, right? These things. Ooh, has a little green spot on it. And as long as there's a certain number of these in circulation, the value of them stays fairly constant. More of them go into circulation, the value drops. So yeah, theft by inflation. Sassafras says, golden rule is the Wheaton rule. People are familiar with the Wheaton rule. All right. So first we start off with an understanding of natural law. Now here's the cool part. Here's the cool part of natural law. There is no need for an issuing authority for natural law. I'm going to repeat that again in case you missed it, because people talking, kids chatter. There is no need for an issuing authority for natural law. It does not have to come from the church. It does not have to come from the state. It comes from the natural consequence of the needs of human beings to be able to exist in this social framework. It is automatic and inherent to the condition of human beings as a social creature. As a result, should we experience an event where a certain group or organization that has been responsible for issuing law goes out of business, dang, very tasty, have no need for worry, because law exists without the issuing authority. It still exists. Just because there is no external threat to say, oh, you must obey, does not mean that the law disappeared. I still don't want to be robbed. I still don't want to be assaulted. I certainly still don't want to be murdered. And without that external threat, my particular response to those threats may be a little bit more extreme than you have encountered in the past. One could say, indeed, that these organizations exist for the purpose of protecting the criminals. John has a point here. Would it be considered an assault if an entity destroys the surrounding environment by a chemical spill? So we would have perhaps the people that live in an area that may be impacted by a company setting chemicals on fire, creating a chemical spill. Keep in mind, there is no political force or organization to protect the offenders from the wrath of their victims, other than whatever system may be put in place by the communities themselves. And I will get to that in a moment, because I did promise you that I was going to tell you that voting was not a natural right, and nor is trial by a jury. Shocking and controversial. All right. And the wrath of the victims is a very real thing. So here we go. Let me jump over here real quickly to with my notes. All right. Natural rights. I said natural law and natural rights, from natural rights and natural law. Natural rights descend from natural law. Once we understand what natural law is, we can figure out what natural rights are. The easiest way, this is not going to be long, the easiest way to describe a right, a natural right, is anything that a person might do, provided that they, one, do not violate the natural law, or two, violate the established rights of another person. And that would be what natural rights are. Natural rights and natural law. So with this understanding of natural rights, I can see two things that exist in my day. Once again, talking to somebody who may be reading this at some point in the future. that are commonly thought of as rights but cannot be natural rights at all. And that is the right to a trial by jury and the right to vote. And at this point, I have not completed that particular essay. So we're gonna cover this stuff off the top of my head, and hopefully I don't bungle it. Okay. I said that the right to a trial by jury is not a natural right. But once again, don't worry. It doesn't mean that that trial by jury is going to go away by any way, shape, or form, by any stretch of the imagination, because there's still a good and beneficial reason for a community to have the institution of a jury. So communities may still have them, and you may still have the opportunity to be tried by a jury should you be suspected of wrongdoing. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, so here we go. Trial by jury is not a natural right. And the reason, of course, is because in order to ensure that there is a panel of jurists available to hear evidence in a case and decide upon guilt or innocence in a criminal case, they either have to volunteer for the position or they have to be compelled to the position. And currently in the system that we have in the United States of America, in my day, it's compulsory. I've served it for jury duty at least once. I didn't get impaneled. I went out there and I got to sit around at the courthouse every day, all day long, waiting for the opportunity to get on to a jury. And even got into the courtroom once for the selection process. That was fun. And I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting. I wonder what kind of questions they're going to ask. And they're probably going to just throw me out anyway. But I was all ready to get involved in the case. And then they said, okay, this is the last day. Here's your $20 or 30 or however much of it was. It was a pittance, a tiny little amount of money for each day that we'd sat there waiting to be in a jury. I could have made a lot more money working, obviously. And so there's the problem. How it is that we're going to entice a jury to want to sit and provide that jury trial for you without compelling them by force, without threatening them with some sort of mayhem if they don't go and serve on the jury. Of course, I don't want to be in a jury trial with a bunch of people that don't want to be there. That sounds like a horrible way to receive justice. So perhaps making participation in juries completely a voluntary enterprise might be the best way to start. But first we have to understand, you can't have a trial by jury as a guaranteed right without compulsion. Without compulsion. Hugo Homestead says that thumbnail pic is just heartbreaking, right? Yep. Yeah. And I know a few people that has happened to over the course of last night. It happens every year. It's one of the things that happens whenever we start shooting off explosives in the sky. Wow, you used to get called that often. I got it once. I got it just once, and then they didn't even use me. John's saying, what if you don't believe that the system is fair? If you don't believe the system is fair, why should you participate in it? Yeah, no, in all seriousness, why should you participate? So my recommendation is that communities that would like to continue to have trials by jury, and the reason why you would want for a community to continue to offer a trial by jury, and that means that the members of the community would have to volunteer to go down to the courthouse to sit in on juries, to listen to evidence, and make decisions on cases, so that members of the community, whenever they commit offenses, inadvertently, intentionally, or by case of misunderstanding, have an avenue that will allow them to undergo a civil process and the resulting consequences be acceptable to the community as a whole. It's for the benefit and the health of the community that a community would offer trial by jury. The alternative is whoever is currently responsible for the role of sheriff or constable in your community will go to the accused and go, look, buddy, we got two ways of doing this. I don't really have a dog in this fight, but there's been some allegations made against you, and we'd like for you to come in and have a seat in the courthouse and let people chew the fat about this a little bit and figure out what really went down and who's to blame, if anybody at all, and work out what would be the appropriate consequences of any misdoing, if any did occur. Otherwise, I'm going to have to leave you at the mercy of your alleged victim. And if you don't want to come in and you don't want to sit through the trial by jury, then your alleged victim is going to deal with it however they see fit. I happen to know that they raise, keep, and handle rattlesnakes, so just a heads up. And then Constable walks back to his car and waits for the person to go, wait for me, we're going downtown, right? Because the actuality, the reality of the situation is victims, whether they're the victims of an ecological disaster from an irresponsible corporation, or whether they're victims of theft or assault, or even more serious personal crimes, victims really have this desire, a thirst for vengeance. Not necessarily justice, but vengeance. And sometimes they can spike the ball pretty hard when they're going after the vengeance. So as a community, having that available as an option might be beneficial. And I'd recommend that people who are organizing their communities try to allow for a trial by jury. But keep in mind, once again, it is not a natural right, because someone would have to be compelled to provide that jury. Okay. Before I go on to the second part, which was the right to vote, that was fun, right? The right to vote. Let me catch up with some comments real quick and get into a little timeline stuff here. Bomber Steve's popping in from Australia. Called up for jury duty, you're then exempt for 2 years. And some professions like teachers, well, why am I reading off over the side? I can read it right here. Some professions like teachers and other essential services are exempt. That's interesting. Although there's some deviation that's occurred over the years, the principles behind American jurisprudence, the practice of law, and English are drawn from the same sources. I mean, America was an English colony at one time. A lot of the same things we kept. As it turns out, we also kept a bicameral legislature, a titular head of government that was appointer of the executive, appointer of the judiciary and chief executive of the armed forces. Well, we didn't. That came along in 1787. But at first. All right. Let me see here, my other notes. I stuffed some stuff off in a different file, and now I have to double back and find it. All right. So this is a history timeline for Patriots. Oh, I ought to show you. I don't come by this stuff just off the top of my head. I've got some source materials here that I've been using, in addition to, of course, researching on the internet. We have this volume here, which is great. It's a Patriots history of the United States. It covers from Columbus all the way through to the War on Terror, or at least at the time of publishing, what our understanding of the War on Terror was. So obviously some information towards the back end of the book is now dated. We have that we get a lot of our information from. And then, of course, we have these wonderful documents here, or collections of documents. I got these from, I think, Wall Builders back once upon a time. Sorry. We have a collection of the Federalist Papers, all of the arguments necessary for the adoption of the current United States Constitution. And, of course, I have a copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers, which are even more interesting. These are the arguments against the adoption of the current Constitution. And the way that came about is going to be very interesting. Pay attention, follow along on the timeline. All right. We start out for our timeline, since this is our July 4th, July 5th hangover celebration. On April 19th, 1775, this is where we start out. While attempting to close the civilian armories at Lexington and Concord, English Army regulars exchanged shots with American patriots. This is called the shot heard round the world. See, at that time, there were civilian armories that were available for civilians, obviously, to go and arm themselves in case of attack, invasion. There had just been a rather large incident. It would have been called the 7 Years' War in Europe, but of course, it kicked off a little bit early in the colonies, and they called it the French and Indian War. So those armories were very necessary for the security and safety of the people that lived in the colonies. And the redcoats were there to shut down the armories and take the arms, leaving the colonists essentially defenseless against potential hostiles that the British Crown had encouraged to make attacks. All right. That was April 19th, 1775. July 4th, 1776. So just a little bit more than a year later, a few other things have gone down. We're not going to mention the Boston Tea Party or the shooting incident that occurred whenever some boys throwing snowballs managed to knock a soldier's head off in the square in Boston. We'll skip over that. We're going to go straight ahead to July 4th, 1776. The Second Continental Congress, they started meeting as the Continental Congress after the events at Lexington and Concord. The Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at Independence Hall and signs the Declaration of Independence. At the beginning of the show, we showed you the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, expressing both their causes for seeking separation from England and their aspirations for establishing a new government. July 4th, 1776. So that is what we celebrate, or we were supposedly supposed to be celebrating yesterday, is the Declaration of Independence from that form of government, from the English system of government, and our aspirations to create a good and proper government for ourselves here in North America. Sastref says, you have to see the fence to know that you're caged. You know, I had an entire bit that I was thinking about doing, and I might still do it. I don't know. Where we go through the process of teaching an individual helplessness and then controlling them. Is just how to chain an elephant or how to cage an elephant. And I don't have that document open in front of me at the moment, so pardon me. Fact of the matter is that you're completely capable of breaking the bonds that are on you once you realize that they are not insurmountable. It's very easy for the individual to say, well, I'm just an individual. I'm one person. What in the world can I do? We have to understand the difference between freedom and independence. You have to understand natural law and what natural rights are. If you understand the difference between freedom and independence, and you understand natural law and you understand natural rights, and you're willing to work within that framework, then you already are well on your way to doing everything that you need to do in order to establish freedom, not only for yourself, but for everyone else around. Of course, freedom is the ability to act. And independence is the lack of dependency. As long as you are dependent, you cannot have independence. If you do not have independence, you cannot have freedom. Freedom is the ability to act, to speak, to do, in some cases even to think or feel. And there's a bunch on my screen here. And you cannot have freedom without independence. So this is about the point where we talk about gardening, because this is one of the areas that allows you to have some real independence. Maybe not total independence, but certainly the ability to be interdependent along with members of your own community, so that you do not have to rely upon an external force for a large amount of things. Now, some cages are of the mind. These are the most effective ones. Yeah, you could call it a divorce from England due to unrecognizable differences. Unreconcilable differences. Whenever the U.S. started out, it did not start out with its current constitution. We're going to get to that in just a second here. We were at July 4th, 1776. I'm going to move ahead to November 15th, 1777. Almost a year and a half. It was 1 year, 4 months later. This is a considerable amount of time. The Continental Congress adopts the Articles of Confederation, which is the first constitution of the United States of America. And it then began the process of circulating throughout the states to be reviewed, discussed, and subsequently ratified. That entire process would take 4 years, but it took almost a year and a half from the time that the Declaration of Independence was signed, saying, okay, here's us. We're separating away from England. We're going to establish our own country here, to the point where they had the document saying, this is the blueprint for the country. Year and a half, almost a year and a half. So this is something that was not hastily adopted. It was something that was well thought out. It was something that was well reviewed and well discussed. November 15th, 1777. You could call this the actual birth of the nation, but that's just whenever the document for the Articles of Confederation, our first constitution, was written. It hadn't been signed off on by the member colonies yet. Let's go ahead to December 1777, just the very next month, right? The British regulars are overrunning Philadelphia. The Continental Congress has to flee. The Continental Army, spends the winter at Valley Forge. Conditions are harsh. The food is bad. The pay is lacking. But they have the promise of a new nation, which is going to be a constitutional confederacy of sovereign states, if they can only persevere. Their children will inherit a nation where the power of government is held within the hands of the people and not some central authority. They might fail against nature, against the English army. The Constitution might not even be ratified, but they held on and they hoped anyway. And over the course of the Revolutionary War, 6,800 of them made the ultimate sacrifice for a confederacy of sovereign states. And to forget that that is what they were doing and what they were fighting for is a great insult to those people. And it makes us wonder, if we're going to celebrate the 4th of July, is there a day that we should mourn? John's saying, fixing your own stuff is an act of independence. Absolutely. Growing your own, fixing your own, finding ways that you can provide needs for your community to increase independence and interdependence in your community. Those are all excellent ways of establishing and expanding independence, from which comes freedom. From which comes freedom. If you have to have somebody else provide you with food, if you have to have somebody else has to provide you with the needs of survival, then you are dependent. And being dependent, they can dictate to you what behaviors they want you to engage in, what sort of speech even they want you to be speaking. And that is not freedom. And yes, the states were indeed like separate countries. The Articles of Confederation was a very, very simple and loose framework that provided no federal authority whatsoever to do anything. The power resided firmly in all 13 member states. There were rules and protocols for how they were to conduct trade and commerce, and questions of criminal justice between them whenever there were offenders that crossed state lines. All of those things that were necessary for them to coexist, to work together for their common benefit, and also for common and mutual defense. All of that was there. As a matter of fact, it was there to the point that under the Articles of Confederation, the United States of America defeated the world's premier army of the day. Pretty effective, I'd say. So, where were we at? December 1777. Let's move on to March 1st, 1781. This is several years down the road. Several years. 4 years, as a matter of fact. 4 years from the time that the Continental Congress adopted the Articles of Confederation. Now it's made its way around all 13 colonies. The people have had a chance to read it, look over it, think about it, decide if this is going to best suit their needs and their interests. And After much debating, they have signed off on this particular constitution. On March 1st, 1781, the United States of America officially becomes a nation with the ratification of its constitution, 1781. Now, this is kind of important because up until this time, about the only support that the United States had had on the world stage was from France, and that was a little bit under the table at that. But upon the ratification of the Constitution, now it is an actual bona fide nation, and that means that it can be extended a line of credit. Very important. So now France can officially extend aid. Spain and Holland also came in, and as each state is a separate and sovereign entity, each state was capable of issuing bonds to pay for their portion of the war debt. So the Constitution, ratified in 1781, managed to grant to the new country, the United States of America, a constitutional confederacy of 13 sovereign states, the ability to finance and conduct its war of independence. Wouldn't have been able to do it without it. And of course, this is where a bunch of trouble pops up in the very near future, as you'll see. We're going to go ahead to September 3rd, 1783. September 3rd, 1783. Upon the ratification of the Paris Treaty, this is where King George of England, King George III, meets with representatives, ambassadors of the United States in Paris, and agrees to cease hostilities against the United States of America and recognizes amongst the Brotherhood of Nations the Constitutional Confederacy of the United States of America and the legitimacy of its government. So for the past 6 years, the Continental Army had been fighting for this Confederacy of sovereign states, and nobody was calling for a republic of any kind. Nobody was calling for a republic. Anyway, let me see. John's jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead, John. You're jumping ahead. Oh, you just got called for jury duty. That's okay. Okay, I know where you're at. That was whenever. Whenever Bomber was talking about the way they do it in Australia. That's rather nice, right? You don't have to get called over and over and over again. I don't know how they do it in all actuality here in the States. It's like, go put your name in the hat and pull it out and go, well, I guess we're going to send this guy a letter. I have no idea. No idea. James Roshan said, just joined. What's going on? We are in the midst of a timeline for the for the United States of America. We started out at 1775 with the shot heard round the world, and we are currently at the time period between 1783 through 1787. This is the time period following the Revolutionary War. Hostilities with England have ceased. Normal trade has resumed. England is more than happy to resume trade with the United States of America. They're happy to get their hands on these goods that they were able to get from the colonies before. Only now the colonies get to get a little bigger share of the take, and they aren't paying an exorbitant tax on their tea. So this is about 4 years here, 1783 through 1787. The states are paying off their debts at different rates. Some are paying them off faster than others, whether that's because they're getting more revenue in the state treasuries or because they're devoting more of their attention to paying off the debts than, say, the other states. I'm not entirely certain. That would have to be examined on a state-by-state basis, and I have not done that particular research. But I'm aware that they have different rates that the states have been paying off their debt. So some are further along at paying off the debt than others. This is kind of important because of what's getting ready to happen. All right. All right. So some of the bondholders that hold the bonds that were issued during the Revolutionary War are fearing default on these bonds because not all the states are paying off their bonds at equal rates. Others simply need money to rebuild after the war. I've got the war bonds, but I don't have any cash, and I've got, my roof was damaged. My house was burned down whenever they sacked Boston. I need to rebuild, and I need cash for that. I've got the bond, but I need the money. So investors, including allegedly, I have to say allegedly because I am not able to find the documentation demonstrating that he did in fact do this. It is just alleged that he did this. Quite convincingly. So investors like Alexander Hamilton and his New York bank and other wealthy speculators were able to purchase war debt, sometimes at 10 to 15 cents on the dollar. If you knew that you were getting ready to get paid back at face value, this would be a wonderful investment, wouldn't it? Let's advance to May 14th, September 17th, 1787. Or May 14th through September 17th, sorry. 1787. So, starting on May 5th, May 14th, with an aim to revise and amend the Articles of Confederation, over 70 delegates are called from amongst the 13 states to assemble in Philadelphia. Of the 70, only 55 attend, and Rhode Island wound up not sending any at all. Immediately upon entering into Independence Hall, delegates were ambushed by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and I forgot to mention in the article I was writing, John Jay, with a plan to alter the United States form of government altogether. Now, when it became clear that the Assembly would not be capable of conducting the people's business, Patrick Henry walked out of the convention. That was the one of the delegates from Virginia, stating that he smelt a rat. And of course, he's talking about this plot that was being hatched in the Assembly to usurp the rightful governance of the United States of America by taking the power out of the hands of the people in the states themselves and putting them into the hands of a central federal authority. The form, of course, would wind up, of course, being the bicameral legislature, titular head of government, chief executive, who appoints the judiciary. In other words, the same bureaucratic state that the Revolutionary War had just been fought to overthrow, just with different people in the offices, different cogs in the machinery. Now, let me see here. At the end of the convention, that's September 17, 1787, they had drafted a new form of government with a strong centralized authority. It only bore 39 signatures, and at that time, stood a little chance of ever being ratified by the states. It would be announced by the new federal government that ratification occurred, and Congress would make March 9th, 1789, the day that the new Constitution would come into effect. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because something had to happen before then. And that was this little interesting thing. 1788. If you're looking through the records of Congress assembled, 1787, Cyrus Griffin was elected to be president of Congress assembled. 1788 comes along, and there is no election for a president for the Continental Congress. All the members of the Continental Congress are busy running around, getting themselves installed into the new positions in the new government that has not been ratified by the people yet. So instead of conducting the business of government like they were supposed to do, they created a new government, said, here you go, you're going to have to ratify this. And oh, by the way, if you don't ratify it, you're not going to have a government at all. You're going to be living in anarchy, because we're not doing the business that we were sent to do. Instead, we're having ourselves installed into these new offices. And of the 39 signatories of the new Constitution, can you guess, take a wild guess, how many managed to get themselves installed as senators and congressmen in the new government? 100%. Every single last one of them. So, these people made new powers for themselves, suspended the operations of the government that they were supposed to be tending the business of, and held the governance of the country essentially at ransom until they got their way. Cyrus Griffin would be the last president of the first United States Constitution. A general election was held, and George Washington became the first president of the new nation. He had been the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army before. And even though North Carolina and Rhode Island had not ratified this new constitution and had no representation at the time, he assumed control of the country with this new constitution. So here we have 1789 through 1791, and we're about to get to the Whiskey Rebellion. Ta-da! Foreign language classes pay off. There you go. No, the house didn't burn down. Just wanted to bring to light the consequences of actions, including declaring independence. Let's see. Oh, yes, I did see that news. It's kind of interesting. You find a white powder lying around your house, you have to go have it tested. I wonder what this could be. Some sort of white powder. What might it be? It might be. It could be mycorrhizal inoculant. I have that kind of stuff lying around my house. Oh shoot, guys! Before this gets cold, I'm gonna just put a pin in this. We're gonna get back to the timeline. Okay, I highlighted where I'm at, so I won't lose my place. We're gonna get back to the timeline in just a second here. And also, I still promise that I'm going to talk to you about why the right to vote is not a natural right. But before that, an unpaid commercial. So you have a good look at this right here. See this, guys? You see that? This is harvested on the 4th of July, planted on the 15th of April. How ironic is that? This is our big horse spotted corn. This is one of the lighter ears. I was walking through and I saw that some of the ears out there had a little bit of cornworm damage, earworm damage. And I decided I'm going to go ahead and cull those. I have a theory about those. I think those are a little bit sweeter. Go on ahead. And it's sweet. And I roasted this ear with a little bit of butter. I could use a bit of salt. Just to kind of show you that although this is a flour corn, and usually you'd use it for, making tamales, corn nuts, tortillas, that sort of thing. Whenever it's fresh, right around this time of year, it's edible just like a sweet corn. You roast it, you eat it like sweet corn. So today, you also get a mukbang. Is that the right way to pronounce that? And it's sweet. It's sweet and delicious. This is slightly more white. All right. Very tasty corn. And you can eat it like sweet corn this time of year. So you have a corn that you can use like a sweet corn, and a corn that you can use like a flour corn. And of course, you can feed it to your livestock as well. It is multi-purpose. Let's see. Eric is saying hi. Hi, Eric. No, a lot of you guys like to work outside until the last minute. I've been trying to keep these a little bit later, but it's staying brighter out longer. Stabby McStabwood says, I'm going to be back down in your neck of the woods after the 17th. Maybe we can finally meet up. Still kicking myself for not having time to come get any of those days. I might still part with a couple. Mary's like, no. Well, but if I did, that means I may be dropping down to 6 hens and then getting a drink. And then I can just hatch out ducklings and refresh. Eric says he's 20 days out from fresh corn. So ours is 90 days from planting to completion. And so You guys may have noticed I didn't do a, I didn't, I'm tempted to reach up there and grab that corn again. It's pretty good. I'm a little bit hungry. May have noticed I didn't do a video over the course of the week, and that's because I've been busy doing a whole bunch of other stuff and busting out the camera to record what I'm doing. We did record it. I was making fencing panels because we're getting ready to move the ducks again. We have to move them out of the corn patch now. So we're going to harvest the corn and then get all the corn stalks up and let them run around and pick it clean for a day or two, and then we'll rake through and start planting again. So by the 17th of July, maybe the 18th of July, we'll have corn in the ground again for round 2, and it will finish up and be ready to harvest by the end of the year, unless something weird happens and we wind up having our summer cut short by some sort of unforeseeable solar activity or something like that. It's been known to happen. But we should get a second corn harvest. And I'm going to change up everything with the way we're planning. I mean, everything. One of the things we're working on this week is making a hoop 2.5 feet in diameter. And the reason I'm making a 2.5 foot diameter hoop is because when I lay it down on the ground, all I have to do is go to each of the compass points and drop a seed or two at each of the compass points on the hoop. If it's 2.5 feet in diameter, that means it's exactly 1 foot between each of the compass points on the hoop. That means I can plant the corn in a circle 1 foot spaced away from each other, 8 plants. And then I can bring that hoop over and I can do another planting, and then bring it over here and do another plant. So we're going to kind of stagger these back and forth through the rows, because I do have the corn patch laid out in rows in general. So the idea is we'll go ahead and get that down in the ground. We'll start planting either some cowpeas or possibly a mix of the Cherokee Trail Tears black bean and cowpeas. So do a little bit of both. Those vines are supposed to come up and twine around and go back and forth in between corn plants, so that whenever we have high winds, these 8 stalks of corn now being bound together by vines can resist the wind better than one single stalk of corn by itself, even though it may be able to lean up against another one, the entire row, because they don't have any connection to each other. They don't have any unity. Just like the story where the old man takes a bunch of sticks and puts them together and hands them to the kids, says, "Try to break that bundle of sticks, kids," and they can't break it. So that's your family. You got to stand together. Well, we try to get the corn to stand together like family in a circle, in a hoop. And maybe that will prevent us from having wind damage like we had earlier this year. It wasn't too bad. Most of the corn made it, but it did blow a bunch of it flat. And possibly we can get it to stand up against high winds a little bit better with a different organization. So I've been making those tools. I've been making the fencing panels. We've been dodging thunderstorms. And I have, other than a little bit of video shot making fencing panels, that's about all the video I shot this week. So anyway, Flash space. Yeah. I'm going to practice fascism. Should I put that? Should I put that as the title for the video? Whenever I put that up, when I show how that looks, fascist maze. maybe that would be funny. All right, jumping back to our timeline here. This was 1789 through 1791. Let's see, 89, 90, 91. So right after Washington is elected, first 3 years, right? The first Congress under the new Constitution, which is packed with the signatories from the Second Constitutional Convention, they begin to rule the country through the government that they made for themselves. On the 4th of August, 1790, they passed the Funding Act to consolidate the war debt of the 13 states and pay off the bondholders at 100% of face value. Now, something that you might want to keep in mind is that Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury under Washington, was also Washington's aide-de-camp when Washington was general of the Continental Army. These two people have been like this the entire time. Washington and the central banker. All right. So this idea for the Funding Act was originated by Hamilton. I don't know how many members of the Congress were in on the deal. I don't know how many of them were in on the deal from the day that they signed that Constitution to give themselves the ability to do this deal. But it was an opportunity that several members have been anticipating. And in order to raise the necessary funds to pay off the bond, Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton suggested an excise tax on whiskey. And that, of course, brings us to the Whiskey Rebellion. March 3rd, 1791, Hamilton's co-conspirators delivered the Whiskey Tax Act of 1791, setting a 6 to 18% tax rate per gallon of distilled spirits produced, with smaller distillers often paying more than twice per gallon what large producers paid, because it was stepped. The bigger your production, the lower you had to pay per gallon. So it tilted things in favor of monopolies. Go figure. But not only that, it was a completely unjustifiable tax. By comparison, King George's tea to act just 18 years previously, only 18 years. Can you imagine that? 18 years previously had only imposed a 3% tax on tea. October 1794, many American patriots refused to pay this exorbitant, as many reckoned unconstitutional tax. Scholars have studied it and claimed that it was constitutional, maybe according to the modifications that have been done since to the Constitution, but at the time I don't think it was. But in any case, George Washington assembled a force of 13,000 conscripted troops paid out of the U.S. Treasury to go put down this rebellion and arrest its leaders. And this would be the largest single formation of troops that Washington had ever personally led. All throughout the Revolutionary War, he had never led so many troops at once. Washington began the march in charge of the troops, but he left execution of his orders to his former aide-de-camp and then Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton. And you might be thinking, well, that sounds very, very irregular. Why would the Secretary of Treasury be responsible for leading 13,000 armed men against some people that were refusing to pay some taxes over whiskey in backwoods Appalachia, hill country, Pennsylvania? Yeah, that's a head scratcher, isn't it? Except that, of course, he had a personal stake in the operation. So, where does that leave us? A bit bummed, right? Just a bit bummed, because it seems that as we go along in this story, every time it sounds like it's going to get good, the bad guys show up and ruin everything, right? James is going to be planting a late corn plot with seedlings that he grew just a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, this corn that I've been growing, if I'm not careful with it, if I don't get it in whenever it's done and it stays out there and the moisture content is high, it'll try to germinate and grow itself again right there on top of the plant. And yeah, if you've got a long enough season, you can do it. Okay, I guess it kept you in suspense long enough, right? No, Carolyn's saying, yeah, we had agreed from the start. Under the Articles of Confederation, First Constitution, the ability of someone to do what Hamilton was doing, to leverage that sort of a deal was impossible. But once they did consolidated power into the hands of very few, through the introduction of the Republic, which everybody was like, rah, the Republic. It's got a dark side, a very dark side. And we're beginning to wonder now if maybe we should consider reverting to the original Constitution. But we'd have to be aware that there was an original Constitution in the first place and what the advantages of it are. All right. I was going back over here to natural rights. I was saying that the right to vote is not actually a natural right. Oh my gosh, how is that possible? And I'm going to run a little bit long. I'm sorry. I'm going to run a little bit long, but not too long. I'm not going to run too incredibly long because I'm already starting to get a little bit tired and I'm almost out of coffee. And that's just the way it is. This is the last segment. I was watching, I can't remember, Sky News Australia, I think it was. Giving a shout out to somebody that doesn't need it. I was watching Sky News Australia, and they had a clip up of Piers Morgan interviewing, I don't remember what her last name, a lady by the name of Pearl, nice English lady. She has a channel called Just Pearly Things, and she is billed as being the anti-feminist. And she was making a claim that I was a little bit shocked by initially, when her claim was that women should not have the right to vote. What? That sounds ridiculous. What in the world is she talking about? And she had her justifications to explain why the suffrage movement was, in fact, the first crack in the foundation of the nuclear family, and that maybe that wasn't the right way to go. I was talking with Mary about this, and it seems that maybe a way of doing it differently would have been to establish that voting was something that the head of household would be responsible for, and only one vote per household would be delivered. That would be more or less like the old voting rules from the first Constitution, where only property owners had the right to vote. So if you didn't have any property to risk or at stake, you didn't own a piece of the country, you weren't voting. I guess kind of makes sense. You don't want to have people that have no ownership the right to vote to take away the ownership from the people who do. It would be just opening the door up to legalize theft. That's what happened. But as I thought about this, I realized that no one has the right to vote. Not the natural right in any case. And the reason is because if we looked back at the simple statement of what natural rights are, that being that it is anything that a person might do, provided they do not violate the natural law or the established rights of another person. That's a right. What is the consequence in the political sense, just in the political sense, of voting? Now, we're not talking about you and a bunch of friends are getting together and you're going to decide whether you're going to send out for pizza or send out for tacos, and you're going to have a vote, which one we do. We're not talking about that in the informal sense where people can have votes at things that don't matter, ultimately. We're talking about very serious political issues where people are voting. What is the consequence of a vote? And the consequence of a vote is that men and women, armed men and women, will go forth and compel by force the behavior or the absence of behavior, lack of behavior, of groups of people based upon the consequences of that vote. In other words, they will be violating natural law as a consequence of your vote. Violation of the natural law means that your voting is not a natural right. So what is it if it's not a natural right? Well, in fact, it's actually a privilege in societies that conduct business with voting. But when you really consider it, what it is doing, in effect, asking that a group of armed men and women go and violently dominate and subjugate another group of people on my behalf if I happen to win the vote. It's evil. And not only evil, it's also stupid, because you're setting yourself up for this situation where if you lose the vote, you are getting violently dominated by the same group of armed people. So I guess, it's fair. You have an equal opportunity maybe for you to be the victim of this violence as opposed to the perpetrator. But wouldn't it be better, instead of engaging in acts of violence against each other, that we instead practice natural law in our dealings with each other? And of course, that is exactly where we have to go in a fundamental breakdown of services, collapse of the government, that sort of thing. Is we do revert to natural law, and we do so rather quickly. Some people are concerned and terrified of this concept because they're worried about the criminal element. And do not worry. The criminal element is currently protected from the wrath of their victims. But this is why it's important that we have armed citizens. I'm not going to go there and inevitably trigger someone else watching, but Pearl isn't wrong about a lot of things. Yeah, I know, right? The way she made the argument, you guys can go look it up for yourself. But the way she made the argument was actually rather compelling. It's like, I hate to admit it, but yeah, it was making sense. I don't think that I wouldn't go to say let's deny women the right to vote. If we're going to have votes, and there's a possibility you're going to have single women living, taking care of their own needs, head of their own household, then they had better have the ability to have a say about how they're being governed. That would be right and proper. Mary said, "Well, if you'd removed the right of women to vote, they probably wouldn't be single." I was like, oh, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. What about all the men that are stuck with these women that they can't possibly live with because the women have to be with somebody because they have to be married? I'm not sure if I like those consequences either. Maybe we ease society back into normal, to normalcy. We've gone so far away from being normal. Maybe we need to ease our way back into it, possibly. I like the idea of an egalitarian society where men and women are treated equally. But of course, our roles in society are going to be fundamentally different as a necessity based upon the very fact of the needs of humans when it comes to reproduction. Male and female roles are kind of baked into the cake. Yeah, the question is, well, is that something that's theoretically possible? Can we vote our way into a reduced government? I've witnessed people trying to do it for the past 40, 50 years or so. More like 40 years, 45, somewhere around there. The first election I ever witnessed was the Reagan election. So I was born in 1971. So the first one I remember was the Reagan election. And things were pretty rough out there, economically speaking, back then. Carter was I guess he still is, a very beautiful man, a gentle soul, a very good guy. Horrible president. just horrible as a president. But I have no doubt the man's heart was in the right place, and he believed in what he wanted to see happen in the world, would actually go so far as to go and physically build somebody's house for them. He was that kind of guy. But horrible president. And we're still dealing with the effects of some of those programs that came out during the Carter administration. All right. So Carolyn is saying our next government must have term limits and all citizens have the right to vote. I've got a radically different idea. Radically different. Instead of putting power into the hands of a few people who will inevitably abuse it, let's leave the throne empty. Let's practice natural law. Let's be a nation that is lawful and doesn't follow political parties or strong men. Just a thought. Oh, we're getting ready to wind down here. So some of my ideas would be considered authoritarian. Yeah, I know. I'm sure I would make a wonderful king, but you probably wouldn't enjoy me being your king. There we go. So this is a radical concept. Instead of voting for a person to go and exercise authority on my behalf, to take all of this money from all my neighbors, either by direct taxation, threatening with violence if they don't hand it over, or by cranking out the printing press, reducing the value of every dollar they have until they're destitute. Instead of doing that, how about if I want to build a wall on the southern border, I'm going to take the money I earn, my own effort, my own sweat, blood, tears, whatever, wise investments. I'm going to take whatever amount of that I think is appropriate, and I'm going to go spend it on building a wall across the southern border. If I want to have houses for poor people, maybe I think that's more important for me to spend my money on than building a wall across the southern border. I will go and I will spend that on building houses for poor people. If I think that making sure that the poor people have enough food to eat, once again, I'll take the fruits of my labor and I will spend that on making sure that people have food to eat. Not too long ago, and this is not tithing, incidentally, because I advertised it. So instead of tithing, it's advertising. Not too long ago, I donated the proceeds of 1 month's worth of ad revenue from YouTube to the Riziki Farm GoFundMe page. They're currently at just over 8,000, not quite to 9,000 yet. So they're almost to the goal. It probably is going to take about $10,000 to give all of their customers refunds for the CSA boxes they already bought that they don't have produce for because of the chemical problem. Either chemical attack or accidental chemical spraying. It all amounts to the same thing. They're out the money unless they can get it recovered somehow. So anyway, I don't call that tithing because I advertised that I was doing it. I felt it was more important that it be brought to people's attention that there is a family operating a farm that is in need of some assistance with this problem that arose out of chemicals being used on their crops that killed their crops off. It's going to kill their business. That was more important. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to get the word out there. But since I'm going to be doing this, I want to say, hey, look, guys, I'm not going to say, go do this and not do it myself. Here I am. I did it. So it's not tithing because y'all know about it. It's advertising. That's what it is. Any other tithing I do, you're not going to hear about it. That's the way it should be. So anyway, spend your money on the projects that you think are worthwhile. I think that was a worthwhile project. Maybe national defense is something that you're interested in spending money on. I could see chipping in a few bucks for, say, an F-18 Hornet, missiles, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to fly it myself, but I don't have any problem ponying up for one. This as long as they let me sit in the cockpit every now and then, right? Maybe I'd be happier with a field artillery piece. Anyway, Carolyn says I voted for Reagan in both of his terms. Yeah, I was too young to vote for Reagan. I was old enough to vote for Bush afterwards. Carter was a Nineveh president. Yeah. See, structure and government are not necessarily the same thing, just like freedom and independence are not necessarily the same thing. Somebody asked a question earlier today about what our favorite book of the Bible was. And I said my favorite book of the Bible is actually, if I think about it enough, it's 2 Samuel. And the reason Samuel and 2 Samuel are my favorites is because it tells a time when men were living under law, but without government. They were living free under law. And then they had to go and get a king and mess it all up. And that's the reason why it stands out to me, is because there's the message right there that if you live under natural law, you can live and have a functioning society. And not only is it a functioning society, it's a society that is capable of actually defending itself from outside threats. and capable of managing the internal problems of crime as well. So you can have structure. You don't need the government to provide structure. You don't need the government to provide you with the law. Now, deciding what happens whenever people violate natural law in your community is going to be something that happens if your community decides to voluntarily participate in a jury system. Otherwise, it's going to be decided by the people who are offended, and they'll handle things themselves rather quickly and efficiently. That doesn't have to happen very often before people stop violating egregiously. All right. So Mary is talking about nullification, not jury nullification, but nullification under 10th Amendment power, state nullification. That may be something that Mary and I are going to talk about in a, we might get together and hang out in her truck and drink some beers and talk about some of the things that the states can do themselves under the framework and system that currently exists to begin establishing some independence for the states and protection for the citizens. Mary had a good idea. She says it's something that other people have talked about, but the way she put it, actually, I kind of like the way she put it. It sounds good. We're going to bring that to you here in the course of the next week or so, I suppose. Whenever we have our date night, we'll just set up a camera and get silly drunk and talk about this sort of stuff. But it'll probably appear on the Marius Tulsa Fox channel instead of here. The only reason I did this is because it's the 5th of July and I needed a topic for a live stream. So anyway, guys, I am going to go ahead and call it a night. We cover everything. Natural law, yes. Natural rights, yes. Why right to a trial by a jury? Why right to vote are not in fact natural rights, but privileges that can be granted in a social structure. Individual communities can establish trial by jury as something that you can have in your community. It's not necessarily something that's going to disappear. I happen to like trial by jury, and I would highly recommend that any community I'm part of participate in, and I'd be happy to volunteer to go sit in a jury, just as long as it isn't a complete and total waste of my time the way the system currently is, because I get down there and there's no panel. I just sit there for days on end and do nothing. I could be doing something useful with my time. Anyway, good night, guys. I hope you have a wonderful evening. If you found the video informative or entertaining, you know what to do. I will catch you next time. Until then, get out there.